Everyone in the house may feed the cat, everyone may play with it, everyone may call its name. But when the room gets quiet, the cat keeps returning to one person. It sleeps beside them, waits outside their door, and somehow always seems to know when they're around. Coincidence? Sometimes. But some cats can form remarkably strong bonds with particular humans, and with certain breeds, that attachment can feel almost impossible to ignore. Today we're looking at 7 cat breeds known for forming powerful connections with their people. And by the end, you may finally understand why some cats don't simply find a home. They choose a person. Some cats are perfectly happy knowing you're somewhere in the house. A Siamese may prefer to know exactly what you're doing. These cats have a reputation for being highly social, expressive, and deeply interested in the people around them. And when a Siamese forms a strong connection with someone, it can feel less like owning a cat, and more like having a tiny roommate who insists on being included in everything. You're working? It wants to be nearby. You move to another room? Don't be surprised if your shadow suddenly has 4 legs, and if you've been ignoring it for too long, a Siamese may have something to say about that. Literally. They're famously vocal cats, capable of using their distinctive voices to demand attention, start interactions, or simply remind you that they exist. But beneath all that personality is something more interesting. Siamese cats are extremely people-oriented. They often thrive on interaction, routine, play, and companionship. And while an individual Siamese can bond with several members of a household, some develop an especially noticeable attachment to a particular person. Not necessarily the person who feeds them most. Sometimes it's the person who plays with them, talks to them, understands when they want attention, and when they don't. In other words, you may not earn a Siamese's loyalty by simply taking care of it. You earn it by becoming part of its world, and once that happens, silence may become a thing of the past. But not every cat announces its favorite person quite so loudly. The next breed can make the same decision, without saying much at all. A Russian Blue probably won't announce that you're its favorite person. In fact, at first, you may not even realize you've been chosen. These cats are often described as gentle, intelligent, and somewhat reserved, especially around unfamiliar people. A visitor walks through the door. Your Russian Blue may decide that watching from a distance is perfectly reasonable, but with the people it knows and trusts, the story can look very different. And that's what makes its affection so interesting. A Russian Blue doesn't necessarily need to be the loudest cat in the room. It may simply keep appearing wherever you are. You sit down, and eventually, it's nearby. You move to another room, and sometime later, those green eyes appear again. You wake up in the morning, and somehow, your quiet companion already seems to know the routine. That's the difference between demanding attention and quietly choosing proximity. Russian Blues are often creatures of habit. They can become comfortable with predictable routines and familiar environments, and the humans inside those routines can become especially important to them. But here's where people sometimes misunderstand cats like this. A reserved cat isn't necessarily an unaffectionate cat. Sometimes, trust simply takes longer to see. And once a cautious cat decides that you're safe, the smallest behaviors can suddenly mean much more. Sitting close instead of across the room, waiting nearby instead of hiding, relaxing completely when you're there. None of these moments look dramatic, but that's exactly the point. With a Russian Blue, being chosen may not feel like winning someone's attention. It can feel like being quietly admitted into a private world that not everyone gets to enter. And if you think quiet loyalty is powerful, the next cat takes bonding in almost the opposite direction. Because number 5 doesn't simply want to watch your world. It wants to be involved in it. A Bengal doesn't usually build a relationship by sitting quietly in the background. It wants in. On the game. On the routine. Sometimes, apparently, on whatever you're trying to do without it. Bengals are known for being active, curious, intelligent cats, and that combination can make their relationships with humans feel unusually interactive. This isn't always the cat that simply waits for affection. It may want engagement, play, something to investigate, a reason to use that restless brain. And that's where the bond can become interesting. Because when one person consistently becomes the source of those experiences, the Bengal may begin seeking that person out again and again. Not because every Bengal automatically chooses a single favorite human. Individual cats are far more complicated than that. But when a strong bond does develop, it can feel less like quiet companionship and more like a partnership. You're not simply the person sharing its home. You're the person who makes things happen, the person associated with play, exploration, attention, and perhaps most importantly, understanding. Because a high-energy, intelligent cat isn't always easy to live with. What looks like mischief may sometimes be boredom. What looks like endless energy may simply be a cat asking for more stimulation than you expected. The person who understands that difference can become incredibly important. And that's what makes the Bengal so different from the Russian blue before it. One may quietly enter your world, the other may try to drag you into its own. But number 4 doesn't need that kind of intensity to stay close. In fact, one of the biggest cats on this list may have one of the gentlest ways of saying, "I just want to be where you are." A Maine coon doesn't need to sit in your lap to make one thing obvious. It knows where you are, and somehow, it often ends up there too. These cats are famous for their enormous size, thick coats, and almost wild appearance. But behind that intimidating exterior is often a remarkably social companion, and this is where the Maine coon's version of attachment becomes interesting. It may not demand constant attention. It may not follow you around screaming for affection. Sometimes, it simply chooses proximity. You're working at your desk, it settles nearby, you're watching television, there's suddenly a giant cat occupying the other end of the couch. You walk into the kitchen, a few moments later, guess who's there? For some Maine coons, affection isn't about being held every second. It's about sharing your space, being involved without overwhelming you. And over time, that quiet presence can become one of the strongest forms of companionship. Because eventually you stop noticing that the cat keeps following your routine. Until one day, it isn't there. And the room suddenly feels strangely empty. That's when you realize something. You weren't simply getting used to the cat. The cat was building itself into your everyday life. And when one particular person becomes the source of comfort, interaction, and security, that connection can become especially meaningful. If you've ever had a cat choose you like that, you already know how difficult the feeling is to explain. And if you love discovering what animals are really thinking behind those familiar faces, subscribe to Wild Unknown. Because we're only at number 4. And the cats ahead take human attachment even further, especially the next one. Because while the Maine coon may be happy simply being near you, number 3 may actively come looking for you. Some cats wait for you to notice them. A Burmese may decide that's taking far too long. These cats are often known for being social, curious, and strongly people-oriented, and that's what makes their version of attachment different from the Maine coon. A Maine coon may simply enjoy sharing your space. A Burmese often seems to want something more. Interaction. It wants to know what's happening, who's home, where you've gone, and perhaps most importantly, why you thought you could do something interesting without inviting the cat. That desire for human company can create remarkably close relationships. Imagine coming home after a long day. Before you've settled in, there's your Burmese. Not necessarily because food is coming, not because you've called its name, but because you came back. And over time, those small reunions can become part of the relationship. Your voice becomes familiar. Your routines become predictable. Your presence becomes associated with play, comfort, attention, and safety. That's how attachment can quietly grow, not through one dramatic moment, but through hundreds of ordinary ones. Of course, Burmese cats can be affectionate with multiple people, and every individual has its own personality. But when one develops an especially strong preference for a particular human, it may become difficult not to notice. Because the cat isn't simply accepting affection when it's offered, it's seeking the person out. And maybe that's one of the clearest signs that you've been chosen, not when a cat stays because you placed it beside you, but when it had an entire house to explore and came looking for you instead. But number 2 takes that idea even further, because once this little black cat decides you're worth following, you may discover something unexpected. You have a shadow now. At first, you may think it's a coincidence. You walk into the kitchen. Your Bombay appears. You sit on the couch. There it is again. You head toward another room. And a few seconds later, 4 quiet paws are coming behind you. Eventually, you realize something. This cat isn't wandering around the house. It's following you. Bombays are often described as affectionate, social, and strongly interested in human companionship. And beneath that sleek black coat and almost miniature panther appearance, there can be a cat that wants surprisingly little distance from the people it loves. That's what makes the Bombay's version of attachment so easy to notice. It isn't necessarily about one dramatic display of affection. It's the repetition. The cat beside you in the morning, the familiar face appearing when you settle down at night, the quiet companion that somehow keeps turning up wherever life is happening. And when a Bombay becomes particularly attached to one member of the household, that person can begin to feel less like an owner and more like the center of the cat's daily routine. Of course, personality matters. Not every Bombay will choose one human over everyone else. But when that preference develops, you may never need to wonder who the favorite is. Everyone in the house can probably see it. And perhaps that's why being chosen by a cat feels so different from simply being loved by one. Affection can be shared, but preference? Preference feels personal. And yet, our number 1 cat may take that human connection even further, because this breed isn't famous for quietly loving people from across the room. It wants interaction, it wants conversation, it wants your attention. And once you're part of its world, ignoring it may no longer be an option. An Oriental Shorthair doesn't exactly believe in loving you from a distance. Once you're important to this cat, you tend to know it. Closely related to the Siamese, Oriental Shorthairs are known for being social, intelligent, expressive, and intensely interested in the humans around them. They don't simply live in the same house as you. They can make themselves part of the experience, your morning routine, your quiet evenings, your conversations, even the moments when you'd really prefer to have a little privacy. And yes, they may have an opinion about all of it. But underneath that enormous personality is the reason this breed takes our number 1 spot. For some Oriental Shorthairs, human companionship isn't just something they enjoy occasionally. It can become an important part of everyday life. Give them interaction, talk to them, play with them, let them become part of your routine, and that relationship can grow remarkably close. Sometimes one person becomes especially important, not because the cat has calculated who provides the most food, but because relationships are built from thousands of tiny moments. The person who understands the different sounds, the person who knows when playtime is coming, the person whose lap feels familiar, the person who somehow notices what the cat wants before anyone else does. And eventually, something changes. You're no longer simply taking care of the cat. You're part of its world. That's the strange beauty of being chosen by an animal. You can't force it. You can't explain exactly when it happened. One day, there was simply a cat in your house. And somewhere between the meals, the conversations, the games, and the quiet moments, you became its person. But that leaves one final question. Why you? Out of everyone in the house, why does a cat sometimes keep coming back to the same human? The answer may say less about the breed and more about the relationship you've built together. So why does a cat choose one person over everyone else? Maybe it's your voice, your routine, the way you play, or simply the feeling of safety it has when you're nearby. Whatever the reason, that connection isn't created by breed alone. It's built through hundreds of small moments, until one day you realize the cat keeps choosing you. So tell us in the comments, has a cat ever chosen you as its favorite person? And what breed was it? Subscribe to Wild Unknown for more stories hidden behind the animals we think we already understand. Because sometimes, you don't choose the cat that changes your life. The cat chooses you.